Most gardeners don't ruin their soil with chemicals. They ruin it with good intentions and a bucket of ash. I've seen more nutrient lockout, stalled growth, and twisted leaves caused by careless ash application than by most synthetic fertilizers. The mistake is simple. People treat ash like harmless organic dust. It's not. It's a concentrated alkaline mineral input, and if you don't respect it, it will absolutely throw your soil out of balance. If you care about real yields, soil structure, and long-term fertility, subscribe to the channel now, because we're not here for garden myths. We're here to grow better food through tested practice. Let's get into what ash really does and how to use it without damaging your beds. Ash is not fertilizer in the way most people think it is. When people say wood ash is full of nutrients, that's technically true, but it's incomplete. What ash really is, especially from clean hardwood, is primarily potassium carbonate, along with calcium compounds and trace minerals. There's almost no nitrogen left because it burned off in the fire, so if you're spreading ash, expecting leafy growth like you'd get from composted manure, you'll be disappointed. In my own beds, I treat ash as a potassium and pH amendment, not as a balanced fertilizer. Potassium helps with fruiting, root strength, and disease resistance. Calcium helps structure soil and cell walls. But here's the catch: ash is highly alkaline. On average, wood ash has a pH between 9 and 13, depending on burn conditions. That means it acts similarly to agricultural lime, but faster. I've tested this in raised beds that were already sitting at a pH of 6.8. A heavy ash application pushed them over 7.5 within weeks. Tomatoes started showing magnesium deficiency, not because the magnesium wasn't there, but because the pH locked it out. That's the real danger. The fastest way to damage your soil is by guessing the pH. If you're not testing your soil, you shouldn't be using ash. Period. I don't care how experienced you are. Even in my own backyard beds, I test at least once per season before adding alkaline inputs. Ash raises pH quickly because it dissolves fast compared to limestone. In a small backyard garden bed, say 4 by 8 feet, spreading even 2 full shovels of ash can be excessive if the soil is already neutral. The safe working rate I use is about 1 to 2 cups per 10 square feet per season, and only if the soil pH is below 6.5. That's it. Not a bucket, not a wheelbarrow. In acidic soils, especially below 5.5, ash can be beneficial. I've rehabilitated acidic plots where blueberries were failing because the soil was too sour for most vegetables. But for crops like potatoes and blueberries that prefer acidic conditions, ash is a bad idea. I've seen potato scab explode after ash applications because the higher pH encourages that disease. Raised beds are even more sensitive than open ground. Raised beds have limited buffering capacity. The soil volume is small, and there's nowhere for excess alkalinity to disperse. I learned this the hard way years ago when I dumped fireplace ash into a 3-foot by 6-foot raised bed, thinking winter rains would mellow it out. Instead, spring seedlings came up pale and stunted. A soil test showed pH had climbed above 7.8. It took 2 seasons of compost, elemental sulfur, and careful watering to bring it back down. Now, I never apply ash directly in thick layers to raised beds. I either compost it first or apply very small amounts and mix thoroughly into the top 3 to 4 inches of soil. Never leave it sitting on the surface. Surface ash can create a crust that repels water and forms localized high pH pockets. Ash and compost work together, but only in the right proportion. One of the safest ways to use ash is by integrating it into compost piles. But again, moderation matters. For every 4 to 6 inches of high-carbon material like dry leaves or straw, I'll sprinkle a very thin dusting of ash. Not a layer, a dusting. Ash adds potassium and helps reduce odor in compost, but too much will raise the pH of the entire pile and slow microbial activity. Compost microbes prefer slightly acidic to neutral conditions. If you turn your compost and it smells sharp or feels powdery instead of rich and earthy, you may have overdone the ash. When composted properly, ash becomes more buffered and less aggressive when added to beds. That's the form I prefer using in vegetable gardens. Let's talk hydroponics, because I've tested this too. Raw ash has no place directly in hydroponic reservoirs. It will spike pH instantly and introduce insoluble particles that clog systems. I experimented once with filtering a dilute ash solution to create a homemade potassium input. Even after fine filtration, the solution caused unstable pH swings in a recirculating system. Hydroponics requires precision. Ash is inconsistent because its mineral composition depends on the wood source and burn temperature. If you're running hydroponics and want potassium, use a controlled input like potassium sulfate or a balanced nutrient solution. Ash belongs in soil systems where microbial life and organic matter can buffer it.
The source of your ash matters more than most people admit. Not all ash is equal, you know. Hardwood ash from clean, untreated wood is what I use. Softwood ash contains fewer nutrients and more resins. Ash from treated lumber, painted wood, plywood or charcoal briquettes is off limits. That material can contain heavy metals and chemical residues. In my own system, I only use ash from natural firewood burned in a clean stove. I store it dry and sift out large charcoal pieces. Even then, I don't assume it's safe for unlimited use. If you don't know exactly what was burned, don't use the ash in your food garden.
Timing makes a real difference in how ash behaves. Fall and winter applications are generally safer in open ground gardens because rain helps leach excess salts and distribute minerals more evenly. In spring, especially right before planting, I use extremely light applications if needed. If you broadcast ash heavily and then plant seeds immediately, you risk damaging tender roots. Ash contains soluble salts that can burn seedlings. I've seen direct seeded carrots fail in rows where ash was freshly incorporated at high rates. A better approach is to apply ash at least several weeks before planting and mix it thoroughly. Water the area well to help integrate it into the soil profile. Ash can help, but it is not a cure-all for pests or diseases. You'll hear advice about sprinkling ash around plants to deter slugs or insects. Yes, dry ash can temporarily irritate soft-bodied pests, but after the first rain, it's gone. And if you keep reapplying thick layers around plant stems, you're slowly altering the soil chemistry. In my experience, ash is better used strategically as a soil amendment rather than as a pest barrier. For pest control, there are more consistent methods that don't interfere with nutrient balance. Balance is the entire point. The reason ash causes harm is not because it's toxic, it's because it shifts balance. Soil is a system of ratios: calcium to magnesium, potassium to nitrogen, acidity to alkalinity. When you dump ash carelessly, you tilt that system. In one trial bed, I intentionally applied heavy ash for demonstration. The following season, fruiting crops like peppers showed blossom end rot despite adequate calcium. Why? Because excessive potassium from ash competed with calcium uptake. That's the kind of interaction most gardeners never see coming. When used carefully, ash can improve soil structure in acidic clay soils. It can support fruiting crops that demand potassium, but it must be measured, tested, and integrated, not dumped. If your soil is already neutral or slightly alkaline, skip ash entirely. Focus on compost, cover crops, and balanced mineral inputs. If your soil is acidic and low in potassium, then ash becomes a tool. Not a habit, a tool. The real takeaway for serious gardeners: ash is powerful. That's exactly why it's risky. In small backyard gardens, raised beds, and especially controlled systems like hydroponics, small inputs have large effects. The gardeners who get consistent harvests year after year are the ones who measure, test and adjust, not the ones who throw amendments around because they're free. If you're serious about improving your soil, start with a soil test. Use ash only when there's a clear reason. Apply lightly, 1 to 2 cups per 10 square feet if your pH is low, and mix thoroughly. Compost it when possible. Avoid sensitive crops, and never assume natural means harmless. If this kind of practical, field-tested information helps you grow better food, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with another gardener who's about to spread a bucket of fireplace ash in their beds. Good harvests come from good decisions, and small adjustments like this are what separate average gardens from truly productive ones.